Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rosa Rubini podcast. My name is Manas Chavla, and I'm really pleased, as always, to be joined by CEO and Head of Research Brunella Rosa. This week, we're looking ahead to the American presidential elections and asking whether Trump dictatorship is in fact inevitable. Brunello, a few days ago, Robert Kagan, the editor-at-large of Washington Post, wrote an editorial that made a lot of waves in sort of the American political community, arguing that we should stop pretending that a Trump dictatorship isn't increasingly inevitable. Could you give us a bit more background on Robert Kagan himself, why he wrote this piece, and sort of what it says about the current environment?
I mean, Robert Kagan is not some form of neo-Bolshevik who despises Trump, let's say a priori for ideological reasons. He's a neocon Republican in favor of military intervention and nation building. He was a co-founder of the think tank Project for New American Century, which was behind all the wars during the Bush Jr. era. In fact, he cooperated with hawks such as Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz. So we are talking about kind of a pretty radical right-wing um, person here, and he's warning about the damage that President Trump, if re-elected, could do to the U.S. democracy. Now, he was, of course, a member of the um, Republican Party, and yes, he left it when Trump was nominated to run for president. So there must be, and probably there is some history between the two. We don't want to deny that. But again, we're not talking about some liberal Republican that could easily be a Democrat. We are talking about a pretty radical right-wing Republican that is behind some of the most difficult adventures in foreign policies by the US. So the fact that he felt compelled to warn about the risk of a Trump dictatorship really tells you that the situation is very deteriorated.
And given this sort of background that he has, one that doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily even biased against him, doesn't come from the Democrat political party, is actually from within the sort of perhaps the Republican mainstream.
Yeah.
Uh, that sort of really says something. I mean, where does he think that the real risks of a Trump kind of presidency lie in terms of becoming a dictatorship? Is it sort of something like the events of January 6th happening again that he fears?
Well, the first thing is he believes is that he will get control of all the three branches of the US government, actually, as he did already when he was elected in 2016, because, of course, he would have the executive power for government. He would most likely control the two branches of US Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, according to recent polls. He has nominated himself 3 out of 9 Supreme Court judges, and others come from the Bush era. So now the Supreme Court, as we have seen recently, is very much conservative. So, first of all, he will have full control of the branches of government. Secondly, he just wants to, he said recently, glows off. So he probably wants to go ahead with a radical application of the spoil system, whereby he will substitute all people in the administration with loyalists that would not do anything against him. The much feared deep state that somehow was against Trump, at least the way he perceived during his first term as president, would not constitute danger anymore to him. And Kagan carries on and say, look, true, there's the 22nd Amendment of the US Constitution that says that nobody can run for more than 2 mandates. But he says this is as sacrosanct as the trials that is going to go through in the next few months, in which it will show how superior it can be to the law, because he will use those trials effectively as rallies, political rallies. He will be live on TV, accusing everybody about conspiracy theorists against him. And if he were to be held in contempt of court, What is it going to happen? Is it going to be ousted? Is it going to be imprisoned? Of course not. So it would show that the judicial power is not more powerful than he is. And so why do we think that it would be deterred by the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution? So Kagan carries on with a number of examples in which Trump would simply not care about the rule of law, and he will only care about what he will do or can do or wants to do, and the US democracy will crumble behind it.
Yeah. And so Kagan's pretty effectively, painted perhaps the worst case scenario here, or at least very clearly what the pathway to the worst case scenario would look like. But just to take a step back, I mean, how likely is all of this to happen? After all, we're still more than a year out from the election date. What are Trump's odds looking like at the moment?
Fortunately, this outcome cannot be, or fortunately cannot be taken for granted. It might not materialize, but unfortunately, in terms of the direction of travel, things seem to go in that direction. Trump is ahead in most nationwide polls, and even state by state, in his swing state, is ahead in the polls, which means that he can actually win the presidency. He will clearly win the primary elections among the Republican Party. He has a 27-point lead versus all other candidates combined, and a 47 lead against the runner-up, which is Ron DeSantis. So, those primary elections needs to be taken for granted for Trump. And what Kagan says is after Super Tuesday, when it will be clear that he's the clear winner, all the people that are currently sitting on a fence or opposing him or being critical, they will swing, and they will realize that they need to support the running candidate for the Republican Party, especially if he has a great chance to win, which seems to be the case at this stage, because Biden is still marred in two very difficult wars that are becoming increasingly unpopular in the US, one in Ukraine, one in Israel. There might be other conflicts coming up next year. And we know that the left-wing electorate is divided by war much more than the right-wing electorate is. Therefore, it will probably succumb even further in polls. So unless something, I would say at this point, miraculous happens, is going to have very hard time to win, while Trump needs to be considered now the leading candidate and the central scenario, not the risk scenario, for the US presidential elections in November 2024.
And we've previously discussed how, the world in large, especially in such an important election year, how many liberal democracies, or at least previously liberal democracies, are now diminishing in favor of electoral democracies and authoritarian regimes. As we look again to the next election year, perhaps the reinstatement of Trump as president of the US would be the most significant event when we look on this years later. So certainly much to think about, Brunello. As always, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Until next time.